Security operations centers often operate with limited human resources, making it crucial for analysts to avoid wasting time on false positives. Today, we'll discover how the Gurucul REVEAL security analytics platform leverages things like model chaining and link chain analysis to uncover those true positive threats. And by presenting each threat within a detailed case of evidence with a timeline, REVEAL provides that 360-degree context, enabling you to focus on the real threats and eliminate the time-consuming pursuit of chasing those false positives. So with that, I will turn it over to Jojo to go through the demo.
Great. Thanks. Thanks, Chris. Let me share my screen.
All right. Awesome.
All right. Do I have the correct screen up?
You got it. I'm seeing it.
Perfect. Yeah. So as Chris pointed out, your SOC analysts will typically get, absolutely inundated with alerts, and they're tasked with trying to understand what is that needle in the haystack. What is, what's a true threat? What's a true positive versus a false positive. So here at Gurucul, we do that in a number of ways. We do that through our model chaining and our risk aggregation and ability to prioritize based on a lot of different criteria. So for example, here in our TDIR dashboard, we're seeing a lot of activity, in our environment. We can see things from, just kind of a higher level, how many actual alerts we're seeing, how many cases, how many monitored devices and users and so forth. And we have high risk users, high risk assets. We're already bubbling up what are the highest risk users, highest risk assets to look at. And we also use the MITRE ATT&CK framework within our platform. So we're identifying, what is mapped to the MITRE tactics and techniques from a detection perspective. But going back to the alerting perspective, you can see here just in the last 24 hours, we're seeing, over 280 alerts, right? So I can click on that and I can start to, look at all the individual alerts. And many of these alerts will be, very low risk score, medium risk score, and so forth. In fact, if I even go back, and this is just looking at the last 24 hours, could you imagine if I look back, since the beginning of September, for example, now I'm having to look at over 20,000, individual alerts. And this is just not something that, your analyst can do. So what Gurucul has done is we've taken these alerts and we've correlated and corroborated them to an entity, and that entity is a user or a system or device, and then when we've correlated it together, it then becomes a case. And so in contrast, if we look at the same time frame, right? If we look at beginning of September, instead of looking at 20,000 different alerts, we now have reduced it to, just the 36 cases that really, is what I should be looking at, right? And so now I can then, take a look at what are the most highest risk, true positive events that I need to be looking at, right? And so the way, again, as I mentioned before, is, a case can be a single individual, alert that may be risky enough that I can again start to do my analysis, or it could be made up of one of multiple alerts. So for example, this particular case on this host, we're seeing multiple alerts. And again, each of the alerts will have its own individual risk scores, but aggregated together, it is high enough and we've been recognized to be a high risk score. And again, correlated together to a single entity that then triggers and auto triggers this case, which can then integrate with your ticketing system, with your own internal incident response management system. Within Gurucul, this is our own built-in case management. So you can view all the different cases that gets auto-generated, and we can also then auto-assign that to different analyst levels or different users and so forth, so they can get then their alert, and they would then come in here into our interface and then say, okay, here's the risk score of 95, this case triggered, and now if they want to again look at the individual alerts, they can see what the alerts are. But then they can also analyze this even further by just selecting that particular entity ID, and it takes them to what on our screen, it takes them directly to what we call our profile and timeline view. And this is an analyst view that allows the analyst to really quickly understand what's going on without having to jump into multiple different telemetry. So you can see what the telemetry that the data is coming from. We see what the host name is, and then there's some additional details. So if you have, for example, an asset database that you can that we can ingest, that would provide more information here. If this was a user versus an asset, then we're pulling all the information from your Active Directory, your HR system, whatever your source of truth is for your users, and we would have that information directly here under the entity details, right? But now what we're seeing here is that we're seeing that this particular host has a high risk score. There's 3 alerts associated with it, and it's also auto-generated a case, right? And if we look at the trend analysis view, it also, you can also see that, over a period of time, over at least this time period, the risk score for this host was pretty low or 0, and all of a sudden it has increased in risk. And then below that, we can then hover over each of these little blips on the map here to kind of see what the description of the alerts that was generated or detected for that particular host. At the same time, I can view these same types of the same alerts on a timeline view. So here, individually, we're seeing that there was a suspicious payload downloaded on that host. We can see that the risk score is 68. The data source it came from was Zscaler. We're also, again, mapping to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So you can see that this is a, execution tactic and technique. You can actually click on that MITRE hyperlink, and it takes you over to the MITRE framework to get more additional detail and more information regarding that particular tactic and technique. We also provide you with the start and end times. And the reason why this particular, risk score got increased is because not just for this individual alert, right? Because again, we're seeing that it's only one single alert, and it was, a medium risk score. But as I click on it, we can get more detailed information, such as the URL where that payload download came from. What was the file name? What was the method, and so forth? Who the employee ID that was impacted by this. And we have some additional information to help the analysts understand what's going on, including a recommendation of what they should be doing should this, as they're analyzing this, what should they be looking at further, and so forth. And then they can continue to looking at this even further. So we see that there's a malicious payload download on this host. We also see from a Carbon Black EDR solution that there's a known severity malware that was detected on this host, right? And so we know what the virus Trojan was, the actual process name, and so forth. But really what happened was, now that we've seen these two, what really triggered this high risk score is what we call a threat chain. So within Gurucul, we have the ability to chain two or multiple, or more models together in a, if then else scenario. So in this particular case, we see that we see the payload download, malicious payload download model, which we saw, individually, and then sometime later we see, the EDR alert, right? So this is what's helping to focus and reducing those false positives and making this really a true alert, right? And then again, we can individually look at all the data underneath each of these, which you saw before, but this is really what caused this particular, generation of the case. So the way this works, and before I get into what the user can do, is that we have this tool called Studio. Studio, and let me bring that up real quick. Studio allows our customers to access all of our built-in models and correlation rules. Okay, so we have thousands of these correlation rules that's available out of the box. And let me just kind of go back and let me search for this particular threat chain so we can see how that's built within the Studio. So if I search for that, let me just load that model up within our platform within Studio. So this is the threat chain that we're looking at. And the way that works is basically within Studio, it's a no-code, model generation tool. We have, as I mentioned, thousands, close to 3,000 models out of the box, which composes of both behavior-based as well as correlation rule-based, models. Any of our models can be cloned, which you can then make changes to them, tweak and tune them as you please. Preview them and test them out before you go and enable your version of our built-in models. So let me kind of explain how that chain model works in this particular scenario. First and foremost is that we have identified what entity that this model will run against. It can run against a device such as a host name. It can be run against an IP address, or it can run against a person, a user. And it could be a username, an email address, an employee ID, and so forth. And then optionally, you can put on there what the data source it's coming from, but the model itself is going to be what's using different types of models. Like in this case, this is a pattern recognition model, right? So this is something that's built into the platform. Is something that's not customizable, because this is our, essentially our engineers are building these, machine learning models or correlation rule models, pattern recognition models, and so forth. What you can customize are the different, attributes, associated with this specific model and what it's doing, including the information that we expose to the analyst so they can quickly make decisions and understand, what's happening, much quicker, to reduce that mean time to detect, mean time to respond. So you can see here, this is where we expose the URL, the file name, request method, and so forth that you saw earlier as I drill down on that particular model. What can be customized as well is the recommendation information, the risk score, and so forth, right? So again, this is this particular model, and then you can customize the time period of when the second model triggers, right? So again, you can customize a lot of different things within here, as well as you saw before. But that's how we are able to really find that true positive, find that true threat, is by taking not just maybe one model or two models, but you can basically stack these together to make these models very more focused and really find that needle in the haystack. Okay. So going back to the profile screen again in a timeline view, I did just wanted to point out how that works. From this point, the analyst can then investigate even further. They can start to you can see that we pre-populate that the query into our investigate tool, and now you have the three events associated and that caused that particular model to trigger, right? So now you have all of the metadata information, but we're highlighting the most important things that the analyst can now look at. Furthermore, the analyst can do some additional things with a right click. For example, they can add different things to search. You can add to attributes. This is adding things over here, so it'll bring up basically aggregating the count for all the different metadata information to quickly find things. Or you can do things such as run a virus total on that URL. And here we can verify that, from VirusTotal, we also see that that is a malicious URL. And then at that point, they can then decide, well, maybe I may want to run a playbook against, the actual desktop, right? So again, they can right click on that desktop, and then they can then manually execute a playbook. For example, they may want to go ahead and quarantine that device using their own EDR tool, whether it be CrowdStrike or whether it be SentinelOne, Carbon Black, or whatever they're using within their own platform, right? So keep in mind that any of our playbooks can also be automated, right? So, automating this, particularly based on a threat chain model, will really help reduce that mean time to respond, so that, instead of the, analysts having to manually run that playbook, let Gurucul, go ahead and provide that auto remediation, and then go ahead and quarantine that device and so forth. And then we would also then identify that that's already been done versus, having to do that manually. So at this point, once the analyst is finished doing their, analysis, they can actually go back into their profile screen, and then really to kind of, continue on the workflow, or at least respond to that workflow. They can then add their comments. If they want to go ahead and assign or reassign this to maybe a higher level role, they can certainly do that, change ownership. They even have the ability to provide, some feedback to any of our models, so they don't have access as an analyst. They would not have access to the studio, but they can certainly, provide additional feedback so that the, somebody higher up as administrator can go ahead and make those changes. But the point is, kind of going back to the start of the, the dashboard perspective, is we really want, we really was hoping that you get the idea that within the Gurucul platform, again, there's so many alerts that's happening within the environment, but we've really reduced everything down to, the most critical cases that to look at, and then be able to then reduce that false positive, really finding that through true threats through our threat chain modeling capability.